Welcome back to Hot Mess Espresso, guys. We have a rugby player, an author, and a mental health advocate, Tyler Kania. Welcome in.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here, Heather.
I'm excited to have you, dude. So just jump right in, I guess. Let's actually back up. What got you into rugby in the first place? Because that is
Um,
not a common US sport, I feel.
yeah, my dad played. I was old enough to remember like his last games,
Hmm.
which was kind of cool. But like in Eastern Connecticut, there's no youth rugby, so I didn't get to play. I played football. I was the captain of my high school team, but I knew that like I could have played at a D3 school, but like I don't think it would have been fun. And I kind of realized that like I was a good athlete, but my skill set wasn't the best for football.
Hmm.
So I went to college. I had nothing to do. I was like, I might as well try rugby. Um, and because I played safety in football and a running back and long snapper, and because I had experience long snapping, I became a natural at passing a rugby ball.
Hmm.
And I was basically instantly a star. I played the fly half position, which is similar to quarterback. We won 3 championships in college. So that's kind of how I got started. It was kind of out of curiosity, from, an athlete just looking to do something. But it turned into my passion, my lifelong passion.
Now, how long were you playing rugby? Was it just college or did you get into it
No,
professionally?
no. I mean, I had ambitions to play professionally. I got recruited to play for like a premier rugby team that had like Team USA guys and people from like national teams like Fiji and Australia. This was in 2014, so it was before like Major League Rugby started in 2018. So I was bummed that I kind of missed that because I did play after college and I made a bunch of all-star teams at the men's level. But I ruptured my patellar tendon at the age of 24, stopped playing for 4.5 years. And then I came back and, I was playing, here and there. You'll learn about my mental illness and how that kind of impacted
Hmm.
things. But, I was at the top of my game, last spring. And then I ruptured my patellar tendon for a second time, which is just crazy because, this is an injury that happens once for every 147,000 human years. And to do it twice, it's kind of like discovering life on another planet.
Yeah.
And it's a really traumatic injury too, because,
Yeah.
similar to when you get a compound fracture where your bone goes out of your skin,
Hmm.
when you rupture your patellar tendon, your knee goes into your quad and then your leg's just kind of dangling there. So that's visually pretty traumatic. So
Ow.
the second time it happened, I knew exactly what happened, which was the good thing, I guess.
Now, I'm guessing that tendon's in your knee based
Yes.
off of what you just said.
Yeah.
I'm over here like, I barely got through anatomy in high school, but
Yeah. Basically, your patella is your knee,
right.
and it's basically held in place by rubber bands.
Mhm.
And my rubber bands snapped. Those rubber bands are the patellar tendon. Mine snapped, and so my knee shot into my quad twice.
That sounds horrible. What was the recovery like?
Well, I'm still recovering from this one. When I was 24 and I did it, I stopped playing rugby like I mentioned, but
Mhm.
I got better a lot quicker. I wasn't lifting weights, so my leg was atrophied still.
Mhm.
But like I won the town road race and I ran the marathon in like the top 100 at, for all of Hartford. So I was able to do those things. And now that I'm almost 33, I'm doing all the right things. I'm not skipping rehab like last time. I'm strength training, 5 days a week. I'm running. But it's coming so slow. Like, before the injury, I was running under a 6 minute mile. Right now, I'm running a 9 minute mile. So it sucks because I want to play rugby. I'm getting old. My clock is ticking. Um, but like, I still think if I can get back, I can do it. And so, and the other thing is, I don't think I would really work out much if I didn't have like rugby to like think about.
True.
So it pushes me either way, which is good.
Yeah, I think that's like the one big hard lesson because I'm currently 33, so the one big hard lesson that you kind of learn once you hit 30 and above is you don't bounce back like you
Mm,
did in your 20s, and you
yeah,
actually have to go full bore on the, recommendations versus like, I'll think about it, like it'll be fine. Like, no, the second you hit 30, all of a sudden you got to start taking things seriously. You don't come back from injuries as well. Like, it's just, it's a hard, it's a shitty lesson to learn, but
yeah,
it's one I've learned as well multiple
yeah,
times.
yeah, and it's awful for me because like I basically skipped my prime for rugby, right?
Mhm.
Like I got hurt at 24. I didn't play again until I was 29. I missed the prime of my career.
Yeah.
So I'm like still chasing it, but like I'm doing it in this body that's so fragile and old. It's like,
It's like you're over here like, "That's a 9-minute mile," and I'm just thinking, "Damn, that's actually still pretty quick." I mean, it's not like,
right.
my ex-husband would literally say the same thing about his, "My god, I can't believe I'm doing a 9-minute mile," and it's like, still that's still pretty good." Like, you got for people that don't run, like me, that sounds fantastic, but obviously you hold yourself to a higher standard than, like, most people, so it totally makes sense. But, kind of jumping into, like, the whole mental illness thing, when were you diagnosed?
um, my whole book is about undiagnosed Tyler. It obviously took a long time.
Mhm.
Bipolar typically doesn't manifest until your mid 20s. And even then, it's like, someone's acting a little different, but do you say something? Do you get help?
Mhm.
I didn't get actually diagnosed with it until I was 30. And, I'm lucky to still be here because I
Yeah.
went through a lot before that.
I have a few friends that have bipolar. I've never been diagnosed with bipolar, but my friends that have been diagnosed with it, it is a rough go even with medication. So, how did kind of obviously, like, not being diagnosed and dealing with the first rugby injury and all of that, how did that all shake out?
Yeah, can I tell the whole story really?
Absolutely. So
Yeah.
tell me everything. Okay, that's what
Um,
we're here for.
yeah, so like pretty focused on my rugby career.
Mhm.
But I got arrested and charged with a felony my senior year of college.
Mm.
And looking back now, like, that may have been my first manic episode. But at the time, we just thought, like, okay, he's the captain of one of the best college rugby teams in the country. It's his first week as captain. He just got drunk and, did something stupid. What I did was basically a sorority kicked us out of their party and I broke down their front door.
Yeah,
They charged
that
me,
sounds like a
they
manic
charged me,
episode.
they charged me with felony burglary.
Oh my god.
So I had to kind of get my life together. Like I had all these goals of like, I'm going to try and like play professional rugby. I'm going to spend this year focusing on that. But when the arrest happened, my parents were like, you need to grow up. Like rugby's a hobby. And my
Mhm.
dad was a very successful cybersecurity salesman.
Mhm.
And he got me a job at his company. I did very well there. I was playing rugby on the side, doing well in that. Um, and then I ruptured my patellar tendon, and that was like the first real like prolonged manic episode. So, I was broken up with my by my girlfriend. I quit my six-figure job. I quit rugby and I moved to Idaho. And I just spent months and months kind of adventuring in the West. I almost died in the Grand Canyon. And eventually I ran out of money. I came back to Connecticut, and a lot of people still looked at me as kind of this like, sales prodigy. I had been promoted three times in 2 years at the last company. So I got a job at a startup, and I was making a quarter million by the time I was 26.
Which is insane, by the way.
Yeah.
It's great, but that's
It,
insane.
it's toxic when you're young.
Yeah.
When you're young, you think that it has more to do with you and not your opportunity.
Mhm.
You think that you identify with wealth, and like you take away the wealth, and you know your identity goes away. But so, I had some crazy times. I was living in a farm at a farm in East Hampton, Connecticut, with an indoor pool, and there was horses in the back. And there was this guy who kept stealing from us. He stole from us over a dozen times, and we got stuck in the middle of a domestic violence dispute between him and his girlfriend. He
Jeez.
basically stole her horses, her car, her phone, her keys, her wallet, everything. And she thought he was going to hurt the horses. And so it was this big predicament. I had to move out, and I moved to the most expensive street in Boston. And I was manic the entire time I was there, pretty much. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I thought my Amazon Echo was listening to my business deals. And, you know, I spilled Sprite on my floor, and I bought 12 copies of the Boston Globe to clean it up. Right? I spent $40 to clean up a fucking spill.
Mm-hmm.
And when my car was stolen, I thought it was the Boston Mafia because the old crime family headquarters was a street away from me.
Mm.
Um, my substance abuse habits had gone completely out of control. So I moved home. I was like, basically, I don't know what's going on with me, but I need to figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up having to quit my job because I was like, I don't know what's going on. And I spent the next year reading 300 pages of literature every day, epics like Infinite Jest,
Mm-hmm.
all kinds of books, all kinds of genres. And, I was doing that because I didn't want to be in my world anymore. I wanted to be in someone else's world. I completely disassociated myself from everybody. Um, and towards the end of that year, I attempted suicide. I put a noose around my neck. Um, I tightened it a bit. I looked out the window, and the clouds suddenly parted. The sun came out, and I realized like I had completely forgotten one of my best friends was getting married the next day. Um, I was going to see good friends that I hadn't seen in a long time, and I didn't want to screw up, his big day, with terrible news. Um, so I went to the wedding. It was really remarkable when you're suffering like I was, the little gestures that people do for you,
Yeah.
getting you a beer, dancing with you on the dance floor, things like that. Um, and the next week I was invited to a rugby party. I hadn't seen these guys in 4.5 years. I had been their captain with endless confidence, and now I was coming off a suicide attempt in the last week. I hadn't worked in a year, and I desperately didn't want to go to this party, but I conjured up the will to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And they invite me to their game the next week. It's an exhibition game. Like spring is all like exhibition matches. So I go, and they tell me that like my old college coach is now their men's team coach. So I'm going to the game. I'm wearing jeans. I'm talking to the coach's wife because like in college she had been such a source of confidence for me. And she
Mm-hmm.
keeps saying, you got to go out there. You got to be playing. Like, Tyler, you're great. Like, and I don't know how it happened exactly, but with 10 minutes left, someone got hurt and I ended up on the field. Someone gave me their rugby shorts and cleats. And the first time I touched the ball, I assisted the game winning score. Um, so rugby came back into my life. It was exactly what I needed during that time. I needed the community and the goals that come with it. Um,
Right.
I was a little rusty, but I was still pretty good. And I was looking forward to the season when I got hurt. And serendipitously, the very next day, the head coaching position for the Eastern Connecticut State University women's rugby team opened up. Um, and I interviewed and I got the job. And basically, I hadn't really had human connection in like several years, like especially not women. And
Mm-hmm.
I found that I was a natural at it. Like I was good at it. I made them laugh. I worked hard to like set up the right drills and teach them the right things. I put all of my effort into this job,
Mm-hmm.
and it worked. We weren't an instant success, but we were getting better and better throughout the season. I had a lot of cryptocurrency that I had stashed away, and I bought the team all new gear, balls, books, tournament fees. Um, and our community really came together, and we had lost to this undefeated team. We got crushed by them in the regular season,
Mhm.
and we went back like in the conference championship game and we beat them, and it was awesome. I celebrated with the team. All of a sudden I was kind of looking at these girls as my friends as opposed to players on the team that I coached.
Mhm.
I was kind of lonely. But during that off season I started a cryptocurrency company, and it was basically a professional rugby team that was funded through crypto. So like fans and players owned a share, and the decision making, like who makes a lineup or who makes a roster, was kind of decentralized among like different stakeholders who had certain rugby accreditations,
Mhm.
just so that like a coach wouldn't be able to make all the decisions. This was kind of a democratizing it basically.
Yeah, like checks and balances.
Yeah, yeah. And I went to the largest crypto conference in North America, pitched it to all these venture capitalists, billionaires, technologists, even Kimball Musk, who's Elon Musk's brother.
Oh.
Um, and a lot of people like gave me, positive vibes about it. A lot of people gave me interest, and I got a lot of phone numbers and made a lot of connections. And I went manic while I was out there, and I just started to think that I was about to change the world, that I was going to be on ESPN and stuff like that. And I went home, and when you're manic, you don't have any like risk tolerance. Like you just have
Yeah.
a goal in mind. You're not cognizant of like anything that could go wrong really.
Right.
So I trusted this guy on the internet with the secret phrase to my crypto wallet, and he stole $450,000 from me in 15 minutes. And yeah, and I was still manic, and now I was even more manic. And I went to coach the college rugby team the next day, and I was out of my mind. I yelled at them for the first time ever. I was disorganized, disoriented. It was a train wreck, and they had three new players coming to that practice, so it was like I had been perfect basically for months and months, and you know I chose a bad time to screw up.
Mhm.
And what I didn't know was that their old coach was trying to form a coup of leadership on the team to like get rid of me and take his old job back. And I met with the leadership of the team, and they just berated me for an hour. And I was like, I couldn't believe it because I had messed up one practice. Like, I
Mhm.
led them to a championship. Like, they prolonged their season to go to other tournaments just because they were having so much fun and because I was paying for it. You know, they weren't going to have a season without me because they weren't going to have a coach. I got hired a week before the season started. And I was so distraught that I texted a player that I was afraid of what I might do to myself if I lost the job. And I should have never done that. I should have never put a young woman in that position. Um,
Mhm.
it's totally unfair, but I was suffering, and I was manic, and I was depressed. And, at the time it felt like my only option. I couldn't lose that job. It had become my identity. It had taken the place of playing rugby, and it had taken the place of making a ton of money. I was a coach, and the HR department launched an investigation into me, and I quit before they fired me because I wanted to be able to apply to coach at a different school or something like that.
Right.
So I spent the next 6 weeks in a fit of like total suicidal depression. I kept rope in my room. The only times that I would leave my bed really was to walk my dog. And when I would walk my dog, I would look into the woods and I would see illusions of myself hanging from trees.
Mhm.
Um, I read that like dark colored rooms, promote depression, and that light colored rooms relieve it. And I paint in my spare time. So I had these like 2 ounce tubes of like acrylic white and yellow paint. And I just started furiously stroking, the corner of my room, trying to get rid of my blue walls. and relieve my depression. And obviously, I quickly ran out of paint. And now I'm looking at it now like it's just like a harrowing reminder of my own insanity.
Mhm.
Um, Eventually that like 6 week period of suicidal depression gave way to another manic episode. And I just got in my car and I just drove south. I figured that like if I could get a new coaching job, then like it wouldn't be embarrassing to tell my friends that I had to leave the other coaching job.
Mhm.
I stopped in Nashville. I played rugby for a week with the Nashville Grizzlies because my college roommate was on the team. And while I was there, I found a job opportunity to coach U19 boys in Memphis, in the most dangerous neighborhood in America, Orange Mound.
Mhm.
Um, and I went there and I got the job and I went back to Connecticut. I planned to move back to Memphis. And, when I did finally move there, I was excited. It was out of my comfort zone. It was like a new culture, new everything. And it was going to test me and it was going to be rewarding too. And these kids really needed good mentors.
Mhm.
Um, but my fourth day there, I woke up to like this tremendous panic attack. And, by this point, I had been cycling through medications for over a year. I had cycled through over a dozen medications, and one of them was an early stage trial antipsychotic,
Mhm.
which wasn't available in pharmacies. And it made me gay for 3 months. But I had this litany of medications, probably 4 or 5 different prescriptions, and I had 3 months supply of all of them because I had just moved to a new state.
Mhm.
And so I just started gobbling up pills, like 30, 40 pills, like SSRIs, antipsychotics, anti-anxiety, everything. Um, and, I thought in that moment that the best idea was to just drive home to Connecticut, 1,700 miles away. Um, so that's what I tried to do, but I only made it to Knoxville before I had to get flown home and hospitalized for 3 days with severe serotonin syndrome. Um, so I was pretty close to dying, but I was so lost after that, because I had put all my chips in the Memphis basket, and now I didn't have a coaching job. I didn't have a real job. I didn't have anything. And I got this coaching from my psychiatrist, and I went there, and I went to the ER. I said, all I want to do is kill myself. I've tried before. I'm going to try again. They put me in this wing where they put like kind of like homeless people and addicts, schizophrenics, like all kinds of like people that were just off the walls. For 3 days, I had a curtain around my bed, but like since I was suicidal, I wasn't allowed to close the curtain.
Mhm.
So eventually, they got me into the Institute of Living, which was across the street. It's one of the oldest mental health hospitals in the United States. It looks like this beautiful college campus with like acres of oak trees, like plotted in the middle of the city. But I obviously, like as an inpatient, I didn't get to explore the campus.
Right.
They kept us in one wing, basically one floor. The only time I went outside the entire time I was there was when we went on the patio for 15 minutes. Um, no one really wants to talk in there. There's no group activities. The food's bad. You can't even have shoelaces or a fork, really. It's you don't go to inpatient to heal. You go so that they can stabilize your condition so that you're not a threat to yourself or to anyone else.
Mhm.
But, I looked around, I saw, schizophrenics who were hearing voices. I saw narcissists who would require to be tied to the bed to be able to take their medication. Um, my roommate had aphasia, which is when you have trouble talking because of a trauma.
Mhm.
I got him to talk for the first time in several weeks. We formed this pretty great friendship that I got a lot of, definitely. But, I kind of realized that I had a lot of blessings compared to a lot of these people.
Mhm.
They don't come from like a white, wealthy, nuclear family, educated family. They weren't athletes with good looks and innate senses of confidence, they're
Right.
ashamed to tell their story. And it was really sad. But eventually I got moved to outpatient therapy where, I did get to explore the campus. I did get to try sugar and coffee, and group therapy was such a blessing to me because all these people were finally willing to talk and, be empathetic and share, that you're not the only one going through it.
Mhm.
Um, and I got my life back together after that. I had been prescribed lithium, a mood stabilizer, which has saved my life. And I got a job at the largest cybersecurity company in the world. I was working hard to get back on the rugby field. By the spring of 2024, I was in the best shape of my life, finally ready to prove to everyone what I could do. And my second game, the first play, I ruptured my patellar tendon again, went manic for the first time since my institutionalization, and just started opening up the notes app on my iPhone and publishing my life story to Instagram. And I got sent to the hospital for the manic episode. But when I came out, like all these friends, all these strangers were like, "Wow, are you kidding me? Like that's an extraordinary life." And they gave me all this confidence. And so once I was in the right state of mind, I sat down and I was like, "I'm gonna write this book." I got fired from that job at the cybersecurity company because of something I did when I was manic. But it was a blessing in disguise because it gave me the next 8 months to focus completely on my book, making it the best that it could be.
Right. Now, before we dive into the book, just to circle back, um, I'm glad that you brought up the reality of being in a mental health institution because we all joke about the grippy sock vacation. I joke about it all the time. I'm just like, oh, like a 3-day stint sounds phenomenal. But I'm glad you were as open about it because we all like deep down know it's not as like fun and endearing as, we joke about, but it's, I just appreciate the fact that you brought that up because, I don't think people actually understand the limitations of being in there. So, that was just huge. Now, did you get diagnosed in the institution or like
Yeah,
shortly thereafter? Okay.
my first day.
Now, you had said that like you managed to go a while without a manic episode. Do you feel like the medication has really, because I know medication's not for everyone, but for people that it is, it's like a lifesaver. Do you feel like that's really helped like regulate you out, get you focused, get you where you kind of need to be? Or are you still kind of like experimenting and trying to figure out like the best combination?
Yeah, look, obviously it's a lifelong illness. Um, I'm thankful that for the most part I'm stable now. I still struggle with a lot of things. Some things
Yes.
get worse in my life, you know, substance abuse is one of them. I don't get as depressed anymore.
Hmm.
While I was writing this book, I went through, first getting fired from my job, and then, something really bad happened with, a girl that I was dating.
Hmm.
Um, Basically, the second worst thing that could happen to someone happened. I'm
Hmm.
not going to go into details, but it
Obviously, yeah.
was the most traumatic event of my life.
Hmm.
And, if I didn't have the medication that I'm on, I really don't know what would have happened,
Right.
but I was able to keep going. And having to write the book was a big part of that, right? Like, I tell people with mental illness, like the three things you really need to get out of a rut. You need community, you need a goal, and you need medication.
Hmm.
And, I just had this goal and I was so focused on it. And, a lot of people don't find something like writing, because in a lot of ways, like that's a big time part of my medication is writing every day. It's therapy to me.
Right.
Therapy is just a mirror for your thoughts,
Hmm.
and writing is no different, right?
Hmm.
Um, but no, I just got prescribed a new anxiety medication 2 weeks ago, so we're still kind of, experimenting a little.
Yeah.
But for the most part, like I take lithium twice a day. I take my antipsychotic once a day. I take my, medication for alcoholism once a day. My
Mhm.
ADHD medication once a day. And like those are like that's the core.
Mhm.
And if I have those, if I'm a little depressed, I'll just take a little more of my antipsychotic, and then the next day I'll feel a lot better.
Right.
Um, so medication is the reason why I'm here today to talk to you. So,
Absolutely. And I like, especially dealing with like a lifelong mental illness, like medication as obviously not a cure all, but it does help to like, keep things a little further apart and a little less, intense when they do happen.
yeah,
So that's like the thing is some people think medication's a cure all. I'm like, no, it's more like taking a lot of the edge off, but you're never going to be like cured. You're always going to struggle one way or the other. Um, but jumping into your book, what is it called? And obviously it was basically a memoir. I love the title of this book. And now that you've like explained your story, it kind of gives a lot of the backstory as to the title.
yeah. It's called The Maniac with No Knees. I think the title, as an unknown author writing a memoir, like I needed something that can grab your attention,
It
um,
does.
something that can make you think, well, I'd like to learn more about that.
Hmm.
And at first I was calling it the lost years because it was going to be just the years away from rugby.
Hmm.
But I kind of realized that was lame, and I was writing all these short essays, short stories to my Instagram followers, and a lot of times I was signing them with like yours truly, the maniac with no knees. And then
Yep.
one day it just hit. I was like, wait, that's the name of the book.
Yep.
Like so I'm really glad I'm thankful that I've picked a good one. The cover is black and white to kind of signify bipolar, right? The two different dichotomies of it. And it's just a picture of a man kind of with crutches and a crowd of people around him. Um, so yeah, no, the presentation of the book has gone as well as I could ask.
What's the feedback you've kind of gotten from people, especially being a man, being that this open about not just like mental health in general, but a lifelong mental illness that you're forever going to have to manage?
Yeah. The feedback's been pretty much mostly positive.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of people tell me I should be proud and that I'm brave. I don't think I'm the brave one. I think the brave ones are the people that are struggling in silence. Um, I think it's been really liberating for me to come out with this and tell people like this is what I've been through. Um, it's a freeing feeling to finally be myself after kind of hiding in the dark for so long. But like the biggest, you know, reactions that I've gotten from it come from like the mentally ill community
Hmm.
because that's who it's really there for. It's for the general public, and it's a great story of resilience and hope. And there's a lot of twists and turns, and I think everybody will like it, and I think everybody should read it because everybody needs to know more about mental illness. But
Absolutely.
for the mentally ill, like I just want them to know that they're not alone. And so, like, I had one guy, a friend said you need to talk to this guy. Um, it was at a rugby practice I was just going to watch, and the guy told me he had his first manic episode, and he got a DUI, and he lost his job, and he had to go sober and go to outpatient therapy. And we had a really really good conversation, and I think that I helped him a lot.
Hmm.
Um, we I gave him my phone number. We've stayed in touch since then. Stuff like that. I was at a breakfast shop and somehow I got to talking to this college student from Asia, and he was bipolar, and I like to remind them that we have superpowers too, right?
Mhm.
For all our curses, we have blessings.
That
Bipolar
right
people are
there.
more creative, more curious, more empathetic, objective. So, he really loved that. Like, it's best to look at the glass half full. And I think that's kind of what I'm offering a lot of the people that are struggling.
Absolutely. And I think just talking about it and like you said, the person that you talk to, like w- people need to understand it, especially undiagnosed mental illness. Like it's not just, the depressive can't get out of bed. There are certain things that happen that have lifelong consequences, like a DUI or, other like reckless behavior that until we're diagnosed, we have no idea that like that's what's causing it. And especially when your brain's just different and you don't really have like the control of that or like the knowledge of that, it can really, really affect you. So it is almost like kind of a relief when you finally get a diagnosis and you're like, oh, that's what the fuck's wrong with
Yeah,
me.
it really is.
Like when I got my borderline diagnosis, one, nobody was surprised. Two, I was hella relieved because I'm like, okay, now we have a starting point. Now we can move along. And I'm guessing it was like that when you got your bipolar diagnosis.
Yeah, I mean, like I had confused pretty much everyone in my life for a decade.
Mm-hmm.
And now I had, when I lost the coaching job, it was like not every girl turned on me. A lot of them were still on my side. They just
Mm-hmm.
wanted to know what happened. And I
Right.
didn't really have an answer for them because I was undiagnosed.
Mm-hmm.
And then when, I finally got that, it was like, okay, great. Like, I know why I'm so screwed up now. Like, and we can work to fix it.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So what's what's next? Is there a second book? Are we just kind of hauling ass towards recovering and trying to get back out on the rugby field?
Yeah, both. You know, my first book kind of happened by accident. I went manic and just started typing it out on Instagram. My second book is basically the same thing. Like I wanted to continue that community that I've built. Like I wanted to keep writing to these people. So I would just write one page short essays or short stories like every day. I do one a day. I found that people like things being on one page. They don't like,
Yeah.
a long story.
Right.
Um, and after like 2 or 3 months, I was like, wow, I have enough for a book here.
Mhm.
So, it's a collection of 100 short stories. It's called 100 Postcards from the Edge. There's a book by Carrie Fisher called Postcards from the Edge.
Mhm.
Um, and, this is kind of like a new era tint on that.
Mhm.
Some of them are fictionalized. Some of them are stories from my own past. Um, but a lot of them touch on stigmatized topics like suicide, mental illness, institutionalization,
Mhm.
things like that. Um, you know, I'm I've learned a lot like from my first book, so I'm doing things a little differently now.
For sure.
We'll see how it goes, but I think I'm gonna keep writing forever. When I was down in the South, like in Memphis,
Mhm.
um, you know, this memoir that we're talking about today isn't the first book that I tried to write. I
Right.
tried to, so when I was down in the South, I basically was down there for 4 weeks, and every single day I would go to a Waffle House and I would overhear the craziest things because Waffle House is 24/7.
Mhm.
I'd go there early in the morning, there'd be homeless people sleeping. I'd go there late at night and the electricity would go out and the waitress would blame it on the government or something. And I overheard all these crazy stories. Like, some farmer in Virginia was talking about seeing aliens, and these two other guys in Memphis were talking about a drug deal gone bad. And it got me thinking that I should write a book called Conversations in Waffle House.
Honestly, though, because I swear to God, the craziest stories I hear are people that sit at a Waffle House. Like, you're not the first person to tell me that they have heard. I actually know another podcaster that started podcasting because he would sit at the Waffle House and like gain stories from people and stuff like that. And I'm just like, there needs to be like a reality show of just like cameras in a fucking Waffle House. Like, what goes on there?
Yeah. No, exactly. So I mean, I'm hoping that I have the money to be able to go around, basically a road trip of the South, the
Hmm.
Midwest, and go to as many Waffle Houses as possible because I
No
think
kidding.
I think everybody seems to like the idea, to be honest. And
I'd read it.
I want to do something different.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I absolutely love that. Tyler, thank you so much for sharing your story, especially because having to be that open about the pre bipolar is it takes a lot of strength to be able to just own your shit. So I beyond appreciate that, and I thank you so much for coming on. And yeah, guys, go get his Maniac with no knees on Amazon, and you know I'm looking forward to when the second book comes out.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me.
Of
You have a
course.
great show here.
Thanks.